Are you fed up with the education system? I don't know about you, but I'm grossly concerned about the present system and the future of the system. Many of our students and our teachers are concerned. But when I look at what is happening, we need to have a discussion about specialized education. We need to have a discussion about inclusivity within the system. We need to have a discussion, Jamaica, on teacher training. How many of our teachers are equipped to deal with our students? Imagine you have an education system and we don't have fulsome assessment of all our students to know their demands and their needs. Imagine Jamaica in this 21st century. We are still using some of the old ways of teaching our students and expect greater results. How can you get greater results when you're doing the same old thing? I don't know about you, but I'm gravely concerned about what is happening with our system. Many of our teachers are not even being compensated adequately for their time and their efforts. But compensating adequately for time and efforts, we also need to speak about, are they equipped to deal with our students? This is something that we must assess today on Unfiltered. Are our students meeting the labor market? Are we equipping them to meet the demands for the labor market? I don't know. Today on Unfiltered, we're going to question it. Have we reformed the education system to be an inclusive system? Have we done enough to see to it that we create students that can meet the labor market? I don't know. I am going to probe today, and Roger is going to probe with me. He's going to answer those pressing questions. Do we need to fire some of our teachers, or do we need to keep them in our system? Do we need to include more students into an inclusive education system? Or are we going to continue to say, oh, we have done enough? Jamaica, for the past 2 years and a half, we have seen serious gaps within education. Are we going to fill those gaps? Or are we going to continue to say, everything good, man? Today Unfiltered, we'll speak about those gaps in education and where do we see the education system going within the next decade. Stay tuned. So Jamaica, I'm in studio now with Roger. Roger, is education in a crisis?
Andre, how are you? Good to see you. I think education is in a crisis. Is in a crisis. Like almost everything else seems to be in a crisis. Education is a crisis.
Or everything mash up? Is which one?
I'm not willing to say, because I know you're going to push me to say Jamaica is a failed state, and I don't want to go there.
But we have signs of a failed state.
But I do think that education is in crisis, as many other sectors are in crisis at this time.
But you know what I want to ask? Will we ever get it right for education? Because for me, I'm always of the view that we need to have an inclusive society. And for us to have an inclusive society, we need to have more people being certified, being equipped, and being resourced to meet the labor demands. When I hear a prime minister is going to say he's willing to import labor and carry to the country to meet the labor demands, the education system, have we ever done a labor survey to see what our market is and if we're able to fill those gaps within the 21st century, within now we're speaking, have we as a country equipped our labor force to meet the labor market?
Well, Andre, my thing is, we have benefited from countries who have had that same tactic. Canada, for example. Even though Canada has a population issue, it's underpopulated. But more than that, it also needs labor force, specialized labor force that our people have benefited from. The United States and many other developing countries have looked to other countries for talents that they can now use to sustain their own economies. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The question is, when you do get to these areas, what becomes of you? What becomes of your talent? So if it And if it becomes an issue where Jamaica needs to import talent, are we just going to just allow them to come to do our work and leave? How much development and mileage
But I don't
are we
want
going
to
get
carry
from
the
that
discussion
experience?
there.
It's important.
My discussion is, why do we need to import when we have near 3 million Jamaicans here? Many of them not equipped, not resourced, not skilled. Why don't we as an education system find ways to incorporate
Jamaicans
them?
don't love school. They don't love education. It's not cool. Everybody wants to be a dancehall artist. Everybody wants to run. And if you can't dance, if you can't run, then you're just scamming.
So my God,
there is no need for the classroom.
So therefore, probably the classroom has not responded to the needs of the labor market.
It hasn't resonated.
No,
it hasn't resonated.
If everybody wants to be a runner, why then don't we have specialized sporting academies?
Because everybody cannot be a runner.
So if there is not running, there needs to have those who can do farming. Why then we don't have specialized institutions at the secondary level?
Farming
like
is not
kids.
sexy.
Farming is not sexy because the education system has never made, for instance, the education system has never
Running
made farming sexy. Because here's
DJing is
Here is
sexy.
the truth. Here is
Scamming is sexy.
I disagree.
Farming is not sexy.
Why is it not sexy? It's because we have never added the value added product to farming with using technology. Do you understand? We have the greatest yield, but yet still we are not using technology to aid our farming, Roger. We're using the same back days in our farming things, slash and burn and then something there. We need to find the 24th century best practices so that the students who are within the farming agricultural sector can meet the demands. Roger, if we as a labor force and as a country not equipping the people at the formal level, meeting them, making it attractive, it is for the education system to make it attractive.
I'm going to depart from that.
Why?
You know what I think the issue is in this country? It's not reading, writing, and arithmetic, you know.
That is what the education
Those
system
are
has been.
secondary to a big issue. You know what the next issue is? Maybe instead of teaching people to count 1, 2, 3 in the pre-primary years, in the basic school years, we need to start to do intentional programs around identity development, self-esteem development.
Thank
You know
you.
what I'm saying? If people begin to be proud of themselves, begin to identify themselves as such,
As a farmer.
people are more likely to be motivated to work to become that.
The farmer.
We're too busy using rote learning, pushing them to stuffing stuff down their heads, and it's not working. Instead, there's a fight back, a pushback, because people resent the kind of imposition, the kind of taskmaster mentality that the education system has become. We need to inspire students with an appetite to want to become.
To learn.
And we have not been able to do that because you're too focused on reading, writing, and arithmetic. We need to get students to get into themselves, to begin to interrogate themselves, to take ownership of self, and then to take ownership of the education process.
But then, I need to ask this question. How are we going to make the investments when as a country we have not invested wholeheartedly in education? Yes, education, the education budget is one of the top 3 budgets within the government. But 80% of that goes towards salary. What about teacher training, curriculum development, student development, that kind of a thing? What are we doing, Roger, to foster the new growth in education?
I don't have a response necessarily to that.
What you say don't have a response?
I'm not sure of the question you're asking.
No, I'm saying, if as a country we can invest $1 billion in printing new money, why can't we use that money instead and prioritize in investing in a better education system?
Because I think there's a large inefficiency in the system. I think any amount of money you pump into education, it's going to be wasted.
What? Wasted on what?
Because we don't have the adequate staffing, we're full of bureaucracy, we don't have the adequate infrastructure, we just don't have what it takes to retain the kind of value.
So why don't we not mash it up and fix it back?
That's a good idea.
Mash it
If
down
it's
totally.
possible.
Because, for instance, look at many students taking CXCs. Jamaica. So many students taking CXC, but many are failing. Probably we need to mash up CXC and get our own assessment.
My issue, Andre, is The
No.
crisis in education is the people in the education sector. It's not the processes or even the
the
money
people.
in education. That's my point.
So you're saying the teachers?
I'm saying teachers. I'm saying administrators. I'm saying students. I'm saying parents.
The technocrats?
And the technocrats. I think they are the problem in the system. It's not the system itself.
So Roger, then how do we fix it? For instance, many students suffer from educational disabilities, right? But yet still, we don't have an assessment unit that spans the 14 parishes to assess the capabilities of
We
our
don't
students.
even have specialist teachers in schools.
The specialist teachers are not there.
They are trained enough, but there are other places.
Yeah, but one teacher to 40 students, Roger. What is the ratio of teacher to student in Jamaica? 1 to 40, 1 to 30? Something wrong. In other countries across the world, 1 to 10, 1 to 15, 1 to 20. Because you need that interpersonal relationship with the students. But then, we need to now discuss, if we don't have specialized schools, and you also say there is a problem, and you're saying the problem is the people, the players within the system, how then do we fix it?
One, we need accountability. Teachers have been avoiding the discussion about being certified and licensed for a whole long time because they know what that means, right? We need to look at teachers. If it is that you want to be secure in your job, you need to do what it takes to be secured. You need to be upskilled. You need to be assessed. You need to put yourself through that. I don't see why it is that a teacher should run away from being licensed or being recertified or whatever other process.
So you're saying after they've gone to teachers college, they need to have a process, a routine certification.
Correct. You're in the business of learning. You should always be learning.
Always be learning because education is not static.
So why are you so fearful of being recertified? That's one issue. Then there's the nature of the bureaucracy in the system where monies get lost or things take so long.
Oh, you're talking about Ruel Reid?
I didn't say that.
No, money is being lost. You talk about Ruel Reid and Grace McLean.
Things take so long to get done, and because of that, you have money disappearing. But then things take so long.
But
time is money, right? And then you have those issues to do with the plant and the nature of the upkeep that people don't tend to focus on in terms of infrastructure. And then you have the students themselves who are not mentally and socially ready for the education process, because for too many of them it is seen as an imposition rather than an ability for them to grow and to enjoy the experience.
But then that is my point, Roger.
We have a problem with the people.
That is my simple point. If education is not meeting the demands of our students, the students no longer want to be doctors and lawyers, These days, everybody wants to be a vlogger. Yes. These days, everybody wants to be in the hip and the hip. But yet still, the system is not teaching them even how to be the vlogger. That is meeting the labor demand.
I don't think the system needs to teach you to be a vlogger.
Why?
Or a blogger.
But probably...
It doesn't require that much of a technique. But I think if it is that we give them fundamental abilities in reasoning, in language acquisition, in certain foundation areas, you can catapult into anything you want to be. In fact, not just a blogger. You can catapult into becoming any kind of specialist you want to be if we get the foundation right. We have not given them a foundation. We have not given them an identity, and we have not given them the foundations of learning.
So Roger and Jamaica and the diaspora, if you were in the capacity of the Minister of Education today, what would be the gaps identified that you'd want to fix within the education system? Roger, tell us.
Well, firstly, I would want to look at student identity and development. I think that's important from K1. From basic school, I would want to begin for students to re-identify themselves, to locate themselves. Also, I would like to add to that a component for reasoning and critical thinking. Before I even begin to be obsessing about reading and writing and mathematics, first we need to begin for them to appreciate reasoning. Reasoning is going to lead them to be naturally investigative and want to find out stuff. You have to find that out by wanting to know. Wanting to know will lead you to reading and reasoning and adding and all of those different things. The next thing I'd want to work on is this whole idea of efficiency in the system. Some people need to lose the work. I would fire left, right, and center.
Hey!
And thirdly,
judgment!
I would look at this whole idea of teacher training. Teacher trainers and the teacher trainees have got to rethink education in a big way. One, you're not just in a classroom to get paid. You're in a classroom to deliver content, to experiment, to report on experiment, to network, to look at mergers, to look at best practices, to make this learning experience fun, not regimented, not boring, not laborious. We have to change the mindset of teachers for them to be seen as researchers, innovators,
Scientists.
learners, all of those amazing things. We have to do that. And when we begin to revolutionize our own thinking, our own spaces, then we can talk about, do I need more pay?
Wow. Jamaica. Here is my take on the matter, Roger. We need specialized institutions at the primary level and at the secondary level to meet the demands of the international market. For instance, we need students who are equipped as early as age 9, 8, 7 with coding. We need students who can become greater than Ronaldo. We need students who can be better than Usain Bolt. But for them to get there, the system must be resourced. It must be equipped with, again, the right teachers, the right professionals, so that we can move them from one phase to the next. But coupled with that, the issue of accountability in schools is a major thing, where many teachers are either under-certified, no certified. You understand where we're getting at, Jamaica? We need to get the teaching population to meet the demands. But coupled with that, we need to do fulsome assessment of our students. We have so many students that are not assessed to see if they have mental disabilities, if they have learning challenges, if they have issues with understanding. What is their method of understanding? Is it through this or is it through that? We need to make the education system more personalized to meet the demands of our students. When we can do that, imagine the kind of Jamaica we have, where we have specialized students morphing out of the sector. So we don't have to wait until they reach University of the West Indies or UTech or CASE. All they can be doing in Roger, coming at that level to get their master's program. Not just focusing on the undergraduate, but coming at that level to put on the thesis, writing papers, putting action, and moving the country in the right way. But Jamaica, the discussion don't stop there. We'll have an educator that will join us to discuss the future of education and where the gaps are and how we can fill them. Stay tuned. Jamaica, we now are having a discussion with a retired educator, a public administrative specialist, Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen. Mrs. Allen, welcome to Unfiltered.
Good afternoon, Andre, and to your listeners.
And Roger is here with us today.
Roger is there too. Good afternoon, Roger.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Foster Allen.
So, Mrs. Allen, we're now having this discussion on the relevance of education. As a educator, what's your take on education? Do you think we need to expand the way our education is being taught in our schools? With the COVID reality that has hit us for the past 2 years and coming out of COVID, what do you believe are some of the things that we need to do in terms of improving the education prowess for this nation?
Okay, Andre, so you have several questions there. First of all, do I believe in education with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my spirit? I think when you look at our people today and you look at where we were maybe 50 years ago, when only certain people could access good quality education, when only certain people could go to high schools, and now we have access to education for all our children. We do have an issue with the quality of education that is on offer. And that's been an issue that's been going on for quite a while. Now, in regard to COVID has really put a spanner in the works, because children who were, there were too many children who were disenfranchised from any form of education or formal education. Not to say that children weren't being educated, they were being educated, but not in the formal sector. There were children, as we now know, who had no access to the internet, they had no instruments, or when they did have an instrument like a cell phone or a tablet or an iPad, they had limited use of the same. They had no credit, those sorts of things.
So there is a digital divide that affected the education system.
Absolutely,
for the past 2 years.
Absolutely. The digital divide, seen in terms of the availability of bandwidth, the access to funds to buy your data.
But Mrs. Allen, if I recall, there was a tablets in schools project some years ago.
There was.
As permanent secretary at the time, I know you with Minister Ronald Thwaites was doing enough to see to it that there were tablets in schools, and students who were within certain areas, particularly rural schools, were getting access. Do you know, even though you have retired 6 years now, what is the status on the tablet in schools project? What is the status in terms of students being engaged in terms of the statistics? How many students on average during COVID, post-COVID, had access to internet and also tablets?
Okay, so Andre, we know that a significant number of children, I can't give you the data and the statistics now, but at one time the ministry itself had said, and I'm going to give you some general figures, the ministry said about 40% of children did not access any form of education during the COVID period.
40%.
40%.
So almost half, almost half of our student population was disenfranchised from the educational opportunities and having access to anything called education.
Absolutely. We cannot. I cannot at this moment tell you whether 40,000, 100,000, or 2,000 tablets have been distributed, because the figures coming out of the ministry have not been consistent. We hear a little here, a little there, and so, in terms of the sum total, I am not certain, right?
So
what we do know is that nearly 50%, let us say 40% of the children that take this number down, 40% of the children, let us say there are 40,000 children in each age cohort. 40% is a whole heap of children, right?
Wow.
And so when we look at the disadvantages that are being built up, the inequalities that are being built up, then you know that you're storing up problems for the future. We also know, Andre and Roger, that since the children have gone back to school, let me say, some children have gone back to school.
Because I've heard of situations.
Not all children have gone back to school, Andre. Right?
Wow.
And that, I think, signals problems ahead. And the children who've gone back to school have taken an inordinate amount of time to settle into teaching and into learning.
Wow.
The
Mrs.
teachers
Foster
are having
Allen,
a hard time.
I would like to find out, because I think you've touched on something that I find to be pretty interesting. The idea of a 42% population of students who did not gain the kind of access necessary for the 2.5 years of COVID. As an educator, could you forecast what is going to be the impact of this on the education sector and the labor market in particular?
All right, so you are talking about nearly 100,000 or just over 100,000 children spread over 8, 10, 11 or so age cohorts.
Wow.
Over time, Roger, you're talking about nearly 50% of the children, let us say in grade 11 now, who may not have had access to any form of education. Think about the CSEC and CAPE results. Let's look at CSEC first. When you look at the data in regard to, we have about 33 or 30 so many percent of the children getting 5 or more grades.
3 to 1.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
1 to 3. Now, take out that the 40%. Out of what you have, or even out of what you don't have, and then you'll see the problem. So your numbers, we were saying that over time you would see 30% or so of the children matriculating into tertiary education, colleges, universities, and so on. Now, I've done the math, but for me, I'm seeing a huge drop, a huge decline in the number of children who will be able to access tertiary education because they would not have matriculated, in regard to the number of children who would go into jobs, whatever jobs they may be.
So this is serious.
Yeah, it is serious. I mean, we need to really sit down and think about this.
So, Mrs. Allen.
And so, before you just let me finish this thought. What you're seeing is a very tight grip on the labor force over the next few years, because you won't even have the children who are what we would say educable, right? Enough to access training and certification on the job.
So, Mrs. Allen,
we have a problem.
So what you're saying then is, if we have a labor market, if we have a labor problem now, we may have even a greater labor problem in the near future to come.
In the next 3 to 4 years.
Absolutely.
So, Mrs. Allen, with almost 70% of those who are in our education system being possibly unskilled, undereducated, ill-equipped to deal with what is to come for the years to come, don't you think we need to have an education revolution? Possibly find a way to get them included? How do we get them included in this situation?
The things that have happened over the past few years have indicated that we need more than an education revolution. What's going to happen more than an education
So
revolution?
what we need is a social, political, and educational revolution.
We need a huge revolution. And remember, revolutions don't come by people just sitting down and saying we need a revolution. You have to actually understand with a sort of a holy sort of, wrath that this thing is not going well. It's not going well for our children. It's not going well for our young people. It's not going well for the elderly. And you have to then say, what do we need to do? And you have to do it with purpose and with an understanding that you're creating a future that is better for everybody, right? You cannot have a significant number of people in the country, whether you're talking about the workforce or schools or what have you, who are just undereducated, underemployed, or uneducated, or not educated, educable, whatever it is that you might use to define those persons. And that does not have an impact on me and you.
So, Mrs. Allen, the reform of the secondary education system, the ROSE program from 2004, speaks about inclusive education. So why is it that in 2022 we're not having specialized secondary schools that focuses on, for instance, a football academy, the creative industries, agriculture, sports, that kind of a thing? Where do you see the education system in 2022 fostering that kind of development of our students?
At one time I thought about the possibility of having these special institutions across the country. But in truth and in fact, what we need is a curriculum that in each school you could actually have now, in each school, key areas that are important to agriculture, for example. So you could have schools across the country, rather than saying we're going to have an academy for visual and performing arts, and you need many of those. So what you need to do is to develop in each school certain interests and strengths. So you know that you go to this school and it has a strength in science and math. Not that you don't want science and math across the entire range of schools.
But then there was a point.
Curriculum.
There was a point that we were having failed the schools, right, Roger? They were saying some schools were failing.
Yeah, after the National Education Inspectorate did its first.
And at one point I know you were taking interest in those reports.
Well, no, I was the chief inspector at the time.
Okay.
And yes, there were schools that did not meet the standard. So that's why I'm saying the first thing that we need to do is to ensure that all schools become great schools, right? Because when you start to pick out, okay, we have a football school here and we have a visual and performing arts school there, you're only then catching a certain number of children. And what you really need to do is, let me just say, if you're going to do that, you also have to put in some other infrastructure, like boarding, right? And a good transportation system. You also need to have a different sort of way of assessing children to say that they need to go to the football academy or they need to go to the visual and performing arts. So the infrastructure would need to be there to carry that. And then what about the children who don't get in, right? So what I would prefer at this time is an excellent education system for all our children. Yes, you may have some schools that have great strengths and specialize in certain things, but I think the idea of popping an academy here and another one here and another one there might not be the answer.
So Mrs. Foster Allen, I'd like to look at this issue of the education budget. A large portion of the nation's budget is allocated to education. I'm not sure in terms of priority what would be first, but I would suspect that education is very much in the top 5 or top 3.
Yes, education is.
But the concern I'm having is, even with that kind of investment, that kind of budgetary investment, we seem to be having issues within the education sector. Is this issue infrastructural? Is it based on efficiency, nepotism, corruption? What's the issue? Why, if it is that we're spending so much money, investing so much money into education, we can't seem to get education right?
Okay, so here are some of the issues. Around about 80, maybe just over 80% of the budget goes to salaries and emoluments. So the rest now you have to spend on supporting what goes on in school, in the classrooms. So that's your books and your electricity and your curriculum, teaching and learning materials, and so on and so on and so forth. When in furniture, for example, the spend on salary as always and will always outweigh the spend on other things that are needed to support the curriculum. We also know that in some institutions, you get money from friends and old students and so on and so forth to supplement the budget. The truth of the matter is we still have not been spending enough on education. Even though we may be among the top 5 or so in the region, I believe, we're still not spending enough. In fact, the UNICEF and World Bank report 2021 indicated that the Ministry of Finance needed to spend an additional, in addition to what the budget is now, they needed to spend, I think it was $3 billion more to close the gap.
And
so
then
that's an indication that what we're spending now is not enough, and that the issues that have emerged because of COVID, poor infrastructure, buildings have been left for 2 years and they have been sort of collapsing under being eaten out by termites, and furniture damaged and all sorts of things. And then, of course, you have the learning gaps that have emerged as well that would need remediation in some cases, and in some cases starting from scratch.
Wow. So possibly, Mrs. Allen, the $1 billion that is going to be spent on getting new money could be spent on investing in education.
You know, at the end of the day, Andre and Roger, whatever you prioritize as important is what you're going to spend all of your resources on. You're going to spend time, and you're going to spend your financial resources and any other you have. So an indication for me about where the priorities are is what I would call a misspent budget in some instances.
Misspent.
Right? Yeah, man, you're misspending.
Mrs. Allen, this conversation needs to continue. I think we need to see if we can have a different discussion.
We would also love a part 2 with her.
A part 2.
This is amazing.
This discussion, Roger, has opened for us to question what are the priorities as a nation. Are the priorities aligned to a new education for all?
I would love to see how that later translate into meeting labor market demands.
The labor market demand. And we have not even gone there.
We haven't even gone there. So much more to discuss.
So much more to discuss.
Gentlemen, let me just say something. I came across a quotation. It's sort of a popular little quotation. Education can yam. But I have said, if you want to yam, be educated.
If you want to yam, be educated. Thank you, Mrs. Allen. And
you're welcome.
Thank you for being on Unfiltered today.
You're welcome.
Jamaica, the discussion unfolds. Education can yam. But if you want to yam, you need to be educated. Stay tuned. Jamaica, Roger said there's no problem in education. It's actually the players who are the issue. You know what is the fundamental flaw about that statement? Roger is a part of an establishment that never sees a problem with the system, but the actors. But I want to ask Roger this in this closing. Have you ever questioned if we have really had a some revolution in education? Have we included a lot of our students in the education prowess? Many students have been denied opportunities and access. The quality of education in this country, many of the students in COVID weren't 40%. 40% of our students never had access to formal education. But yet still, for Roger, there's no issue. But I'm going to say to Jamaica, Roger made it clear, and I am saying the same. We need to improve a few things in our education system. We need to fire some of those lazy teachers doing nothing. Right? We need to also do an identity assessment of our students and to make them understand critical thinking and learning. But equally, we need to train our teachers to become competent and be equipped to deal with modern day realities. With that said, Jamaica, include more students in the education system. Create more specialized institutions for them. Do more in terms of compensating and incentivizing the education system so that more of their best teachers stay within the system and no gone overseas, this or everywhere and leave us with probably not the best. But the truth be told, with all that is said, inclusion is a must. Quality education is a must. Access is a must, but importantly, assessing the demands and the labor force. Prime Minister Holness, I want to ask you this question. What are you doing and what is Jamaica doing about improving quality education in this country? Jamaica, we've assessed education today and it is not at the best place. We need to have a better system where more of our students are included. I am Andre Stevens, and this is Unfiltered. Walk good.